Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Wiebe from the Winnipeg Free Press. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the Kenny and Renny pop-up show. Yeah, I know it's not immediately after the whole Rutger McGroarty trade and Brayden Yager trade. I was out of the country. Ken, well, you know where he was. He was on a golf course. And if you think it's easy to drag this guy kicking and screaming off a golf course, it's not. Like, I'm talking finger marks, claws left in the greens of some of the golf courses that I've tried to drag him off. Not the easiest thing to do. So just be happy. Just be happy we're here at this time and that Ken took time out of his burgeoning one-day PGA type golf career so that we can throw down here in some Kenny and Renny style. It has been far too long. I am missing it like crazy. It's been I don't know, something that I want this. I want this. I want to be sitting in this chair. I want to be talking about this. I cleaned up the office a little bit today. Can't you tell? Doesn't it look different? Entirely different here because I'm excited. I'm excited to be sitting down chatting with all of you. Looks like there's already 10,484 people in the chat room already because, you know, that's what we do now. We lie about the numbers. But yeah, it's great to be back. Been a good summer. We won't get too much into that because we got a lot of stuff that we want to talk about. We want to really get into Rutger and Yager. We've got Jay Bukala coming on the show. He's going to help us break it down. You're going to want to hear what he has to say about this whole situation. I think you'll like it as Jets fans. We also want to dive into the Laine stuff. We know Patrik Laine was a big topic of conversation in Winnipeg for the entirety of the summer, and that got cut short by the Montreal Canadiens. Now, Ken will have to remind, or maybe I did it. I don't know if I had said the Patrik Laine to Montreal Canadian angle on the show. I believe I did. I believe I did it multiple times. I know that I did it with my Finnish friends and kind of had a little bit of bragging rights when it finally happened. I'll get into the thoughts of why I expected it to happen. And yeah, you know what? Maybe, I don't know, maybe the chatter from Renny helped it happen. Maybe it manifested. Maybe that's how much power we have here on KNR, that trades happen because we float them on this program here, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe we'll see. We'll talk about it. And there's one person that I've missed talking about this with, and that would be my main man, the guy who I think, you know, everyone misses him almost as much as they would be missing Renny. But here he is, folks. Man with the best music in the business that I have gone way too long without hearing. Here comes Ken, folks. Kenny, Al Broderick, who we met at one of our KNR live events, nails it here where he says, I miss you guys. We missed you like crazy as well. And I miss Ken. I don't know. Have we even seen each other physically since we were down in Vegas together for the draft? I don't believe that we have. We're going to have to remedy that and get together at some point.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's tomorrow, buddy.
Tomorrow.
Come on.
Great,
come on.
Fine.
Check your calendar. Check your calendar.
I knew it. I was just trying to play it up for the audience. I was trying to make it, you know, we're in show business here, Ken. You got to get the showmanship going on here.
All right,
I was hoping that you'd be like, well, how about tomorrow? And then I'd be like, well, I could check my calendar. And then it would be like this meeting, you know, but whatever. Hey, this show is all about giving them a peek behind the scenes. And Ken just gave you a peek behind the scenes. We set that up a long time ago, which is good. It's going to be good to see you, buddy. Just like it's great to see you right now. How's the summer been going, my man?
Yeah, awesome. Kicking and screaming off a golf course. I'm not sure about that. It was just great to be back up at Clear Lake for the Tamarack, the latest edition. lots of fun. Didn't certainly play as well as I had hoped, but congratulations to everyone who got the job done on Championship Saturday. Just another very well-run event by the good folks up in Clear Lake, and it's been a great summer of golf for sure. Hopefully you're feeling better and resisting retirement from our last talk about the golf. I know you had a good visit with the fellas over at 18 over par on the podcast there,
Yeah.
but yeah, things are good. Life is good, and I'm glad we can sneak this in because I'm off to Italy on Thursday for a bucket list adventure here. So some good hockey talk to get in, and I'm gonna go into vacation mode. And then by the time we get back, it'll be back on Monday. Training camp will start, I think, Thursday on the ice sessions, and before we know it, there'll be a game to be played. So exciting times, and glad you've got some good vacay or resting and relaxation in as well with your family. As we know, has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a good one. It was a long, long haul. I believe we talked about it the last. I had been basically on the road since May 20th. I made it home for 2 days and then was gone until July 2nd. So it's been good to spend time with the family. It's been a lot of fun. But I have missed doing this. And
for sure, same here, buddy.
And so much to talk about. So let's just dive right into it. Get your initial thoughts on the Rutger McGroarty trade, the Brayden Yager trade. I, right off the bat, when it happened, my face would have been like, because that, to me, it was an eye-popping trade. I'll get into why, but we want to hear first what you're thinking of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to put it this way. I mean, I was up at Clear Lake on Thursday when the deal was, Elliot had the first tweet saying that the trade, that Rutger McGroarty was going to the Penguins. And, immediately we're trying to piece together who the player involved is. And, got on the phone with my colleague, Mike McIntyre at the Free Press, and he wondered about Yager. And for me, I didn't think that Yager was even going to be a possibility given how high the Penguins were on him. But maybe half an hour later, Elliot was able to confirm that who was the player that was available, and quickly talked to a ton of scouts, people around the hockey world, and they were all raving about Brayden Yager and the way that he plays. We know he's got an incredible shot. We know he's played for Canada at the World Junior already, and is most likely going to be wearing a letter this year when he's back for a second tour of duty there. And all we hear is that he's a high character kid from the prairies, pretty good hockey IQ, very dependable player. And Sean, I mean, we talk about this a lot. There's a ton of junior age kids that when they put up 95 points, they don't particularly care all that much for their own zone or playing in their own zone. And that's the complete opposite from what you and I have both heard about Brayden Yager. This guy is a responsible two-way player. And one of the scouts I spoke to even said he could play in the NHL at some point as just a defensive-minded player, but obviously he has the offensive tools that should, make him a solid two-way threat. But listen to Kevin Cheveldayoff's Zoom meeting, and also listen to Brayden Yager with Hustler over at Winnipeg Sports Talk. And this is a kid who's excited to be joining the Jets, and he made it pretty clear that, I mean, again, all players' goals will be to make the NHL, but this is a pretty determined kid who, wants to jump in and make an impact right away. And that's good news for, in terms of the resolution that the Jets have here. Still pretty curious, and we'll dig into it a little bit more afterwards in terms of what Kevin Cheveldayoff said about the discussions with both the agent or the advisors of Rutger McGroarty and with McGroarty himself. But in terms of what the Jets are getting, I think they're getting a pretty, high-end prospect who, should at some point, I don't necessarily think it will be this year as a full-time player as a second-line center, but I won't be surprised if he gets regular season games, provided he has a strong training camp here, Sean, just based on what the depth chart looks like. I mean, I think that Vladislav Nemesnikov is someone the Jets are comfortable with in that 2C role. But I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a little bit of an audition at the start of the year here to see what he can do before the Jets eventually send him back to the Moose Jaw Warriors of the Western Hockey League.
I'm going to dive into this in just a second. I should point out, Ken, there's something that's been a little off for me and probably for you for the majority of the summer, and something just hasn't felt right. And I think what that is I haven't felt like a Vittorio Rossi man for a long time. I've been slumming it. I've been wearing t-shirts so thin that when I take them off, I can see through them like I'm not even wearing the shirt. Been a long time since I wore the fancy threads that I got to grace throughout the playoffs and at the draft. I miss it. I miss being a Vittorio Rossi man. I promise you, I will be again as Vittorio Rossi and the boys are back this year for the Kenny and Renny podcast. We are so excited to continue our partnership with them and be able to continue saying to all of you, run, don't walk on down to Vittorio Rossi on Cordon Avenue. If you want to be a Vittorio Rossi man, I'm telling you, you do. You do. Go on down, ask for Frankie and the boys. Loudly proclaim Kenny and Renny sent you and go check it out there. Also wanted to, while we're talking about folks being back, Pristine Roofing came to the year ender. Loving the partnership. Super busy year for those guys. Not so busy that they're not back as well, though. So, hey, you know the drill. Been talking with them throughout the summer. Our main man, North End Rick, 1-204-981-6289. It's an afternoon show, but he's a little bit of a lazy guy. He may be sleeping. So give him the Pristine Roofing wake-up call right now if you have any roofing, siding, or exterior needs, or you can call Pristine Roofing at 204-237-7663. And of course, we wanted to give a shout out to the folks at Cambrian Credit Union back as well, near a Kenny and Renny OG. But again, we love to be able to brag about the organizations that we have. You know, I'm not just the owner. I'm a client. You're not just the owner of the credit union when you're part of it, but we're clients as well, both of us with our mortgages and a bunch of bank accounts, unfee bank accounts with them. Great to have them back in the loop. Okay, let me get into this a little bit. This trade looks simple. And I bring up looks because I think looks matter to Kevin Cheveldayoff. Looks matter because I don't think he likes to make a move that it looks like the Jets didn't come out well in. So to be backed against the wall and have a 14th overall draft pick say that they're not going to stick around and they want to go and kind of bend you over a barrel because you got to move them and you got to try and get assets back. And it's hard. You call them distressed assets, Ken. It's a distressed asset when one of your players says they want to leave because now there's blood in the water and all of the other shark GMs are circling and they think they're going to get a heck of a deal on it. To move a 14th overall first round draft pick for the next year's 14th overall first round draft pick. It's impossible on the surface of this to look and say Kevin Cheveldayoff failed at this. Like we heard from a lot of the people, I think most people had this response. It was eye-popping for me because I was not expecting Kevin Cheveldayoff. Hey, we knew he was going to wait and be patient and going to try and hold on to get exactly what he was looking for. That's exactly what he did. But sometimes I just keep feeling like he's going to wait and wait and wait. And at some point is going to end up out in the cold. That doesn't happen here. He makes a trade and saves all kinds of face by pulling this off in this situation, getting a guy. Ken, this is one of these things I like to highlight some of the stuff that we talk about on this programs in the past. It's like, hey, I think we were right on this one. We talked at the draft about the Winnipeg Jets moving away from a model they really I don't want to say overused, but they used heavily at a time where they got players out of the NCAA. They got players out of the USHL. They started going that path. We told you to expect the Jets to start moving away from that kind of prospect. And what do? They go out and get a Canadian prospect from one province over playing in the Western Hockey League, a guy who we, by all accounts, we just keep hearing is more than happy that to be a Winnipeg Jet, proud to be a Winnipeg Jet. His family's going to be able to drive over and see him play all the time here. This is, so Kevin Cheveldayoff not only goes out and saves face, but he does a 1-for-1 almost exact trade for the 14th overall pick. But then in doing so, he gets exactly what this organization is targeting now. Canadian players, Western Hockey League type players. You know, you can add OHL in there. Colby Barlow's a guy that they went. So two guys from that draft are CHL guys who don't have the options that Rutger McGroarty had to try and get himself out of Winnipeg, which he used and made a big showing of in this case. So that's another massive win for Kevin Cheveldayoff. I take a look at the situation. We can break down now after this, and Jay Bukala will be great at doing that. So maybe we should wait for him with that. Each of their games and what they bring to the game and all those different kind of things. But I just think the Winnipeg Jets walk out of this situation just brilliantly. Like, this is the kind of trade that may have been made if the Winnipeg Jets, if McGroarty wasn't trying to force his way out of town. It's the kind of trade that may have been like, well, hey, we actually kind of like this guy. I'll say this trade doesn't get done if the Pittsburgh Penguins don't believe that Rutger McGroarty is the better player. So I'll tell you right off the bat, there's a scouting staff out there that says, let's move this guy for this guy because this guy is more what we need and a player that we think is going to have a greater ceiling. This is not earth-shattering analysis here. We aren't going to know who won this trade until we see who the better player is out of that. I don't know at this stage. I mean, we can couch it and say who we think is going to be the better player. That will eventually determine who won this trade. It's obvious when I say that, but in the meantime, without having a time machine and without having a crystal ball, Kevin Cheveldayoff did as good as he possibly could have done in this trade under duress with a distressed asset. If you're a Winnipeg Jets fan, I don't know that there's a lot of people out there who would be upset with what happened here.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, like you said, eventually we'll find out. And again, the hot take society will say this and say that about who got the better of the deal. I mean, they're different players. The Jets are, they got a player at a position of weakness for them, or certainly an organizational position that they could have upgraded at, and centermen are hard to find. And again, Brad Lambert is going to be knocking on the door here for the Jets as well, but right shot centers are hard to find, and the Jets got themselves one in return. It's up to Yager to show that he can be a NHL centerman at that level when he's ready to play in it. What I like about him is that, from listening to him talk with Hustler, is that, this is a guy who got to be around Sidney Crosby at training camp last year and was taking notes. He was on his team in this training camp sessions, and, he called him one of his favorite players. So this is also a guy he's a rink rat. He's wanted to be around the game. He's been around the game a long time. He said he spent some time in Prince Albert when Jets defenseman Josh Morrissey and Leon Draisaitl were Raiders. When he was back in Saskatoon, he went to the Memorial Cup when Nathan McKinnon was there, putting on an absolute clinic for the Halifax Mooseheads. I mean, this guy loves hockey, is an enthusiastic player. And again, it's not easy to put up 95 points in the Western League and help lead your team to a Western Hockey League championship along with, Manitoban Denton Matejchuk. So those guys are great friends. I'm sure he got a quick scouting report on what the province is like, and I think it's going to be a great fit for the Jets. But yeah, I mean, in terms of when he's going to be here, who's going to have the better career, I mean, let's see. I mean, again, the Jets will miss certain qualities that Rutger brings to the table, but once Kevin Cheveldayoff made it clear that Rutger's camp said they have no intention of signing, then you look at Plan B, and the Jets found a Plan B. And the Plan B is a player who's 1 year younger and brings a different skill set and helps them at a position of, let's just say, need, not necessarily, like I said, Jets are strong at center at the NHL level, but their organizational depth chart could use some more players. And they've got themselves one, and a guy who's eager to be there, a guy who's, I think he's up to, 180 pounds. I mean, he's going to have to put on muscle and weight and strength and maturity and all those things. He just turned 19 in early January. So that's normal for most players at his level. But again, this is a guy who is an impressive prospect. Now, did the Penguins sour on him to a degree? That's certainly possible, and no one can dispute that. But it also, to me, it's more a matter of the Penguins really liked the skill set that Rutger McGroarty brings, and maybe they saw him as slightly more NHL ready at this point. And, just given his size and skill set for a team that is both teams, Sean, I think it's pretty clear, are in win now mode. One of them has a 37-year-old captain, and the Jets aren't quite at that stage in their development in terms of where things are at with their core group. But the Jets are also in win now mode, and I think that by the time they sort out what they decide to do with Nikolai Ehlers and after him Kyle Connor, having someone like Brayden Yager be able to slide in, whether it's in a year from now or 2 years from now on an entry level contract, is going to be beneficial to where they are in terms of their competitive window, let's say.
I think it's a fascinating look at the idea that Pittsburgh makes this move. And one of the major factors is quite simply he's a year older and he's a year closer to being ready. Because to your point, the Pittsburgh Penguins are a team that, they've reached the top of the mountain. They've been going down the other side of the mountain for quite a long time, but they've invested in that core, and that core is not getting any younger. So it doesn't help you to have a prospect that is going to be good 2 or 3 years from now, potentially. If you get a guy who can come in right now, what you need, I've heard it said time and time again, Rutger needs to go to the school of Sidney Crosby. Right.
Sure.
So if you get that player who comes in, captain of Team USA, maybe there's not a preference in the player by the Pittsburgh Penguins. Maybe they don't think he's going to be the better player. Maybe it's as simple as one more year, however many years we can get this player under the tutelage of Sidney Crosby, the better off he's going to be, the better off we're going to be. We've seen it time and time again, Ken. There is nobody anywhere who ever questions or says anything about the leadership of Sidney Crosby. Hey, forcing your way out of town the way Rutger McGroarty did, that's going to come with people questioning your character, questioning your leadership, all those kind of things. If there is a problem there is probably no one better in the game of hockey or the NHL for sure than a guy like Sidney Crosby to start getting you going down the right path. So it may be as simple as that. We can dive into all the things about what makes Rutger McGroarty an exciting prospect for the Pittsburgh Penguins and what makes Brayden Yager an exciting prospect for the Winnipeg Jets. Ken, as much as I love your perspective and I have respect for it, I got a guy that we can bring into the show right now who's going to absolutely kill it when it comes to this and is going to give us a great breakdown of what we can expect from both these players and what the Winnipeg Jets were able to flip and what they got in return. And that's our main man, Jay Bukala, who's becoming a mainstay on this show. Jay, we're going to have to change the logo and we're going to have to add a J into this thing, K and R and J, or maybe we'll give you, the front spot, JKR, whatever it is. You've been on so much and we really appreciate that because when you come in, our chat room is just wowed at the way that you lay down the knowledge, and I'm excited, I gotta say, for you to do it again. There's almost, you and I had conversations down at the draft. There may have been a couple beers involved about Rutger McGroarty. So I'm interested in your take now on the flip that has happened here. What have the Winnipeg Jets lost in Rutger McGroarty and what have they gained in Brayden Yager?
Well, we definitely addressed it. There's no question. You might have been into the red. I was definitely just a lager guy. But anyways, I digress. You know what, guys? This is a good news story for the Winnipeg Jets. I have to say, I'm happy that the noise has gone away before the start of the season. I'm not surprised at all. Obviously, we knew that it was going to come to this. Chevy in the group, they made out as well as they could have made out in this deal. Picking up Brayden Yager from a Western Canada kid who played in Moose Jaw, who's familiar with the dub, who's familiar with what it means to be playing in Western Canada in the community out there, which is Western Canada. This is a great news story for you guys. It really is. So Brayden Yager, let's start with him because I do have some Rutger McGroarty thoughts, but I want to start with the positives first. So I'm going to go to Yager and tell you that this isn't a one-trick pony. This is a kid that can, for me, he's equal parts shooter and distributor. I think back to the Holinka Gretzky tournament in Red Deer. This is going back several summers ago now. And he was coming off Rookie of the Year in the dub and ripping pucks and, shoot first type mentality. Catch and release is exceptional. And I'm talking about a guy who can shoot it from his strong side and his weak side. which is a prize, right? Because depending on how you want to set up your power play, do you want him to move it? Do you want him to rip it? It depends. And he can do it from the weak side or the strong side. So that's a bonus, gives you some flexibility there. But then, he really started to distribute the puck a lot better, guys, the last couple of years. He's been kind of equal parts both. And I appreciate that in his game. So I think you're looking at a guy that can play the middle. He's got the mechanics, the mindset to do it. And I think that it's wise for him to play the middle in terms of being able to utilize all of the ice, not just as a one trick guy, like I said, not just a shooter, not just a distributor, like use it all. But it's going to take time to play the middle at the NHL level for him. Weight and strength is going to be the issue there. It's going to take some time. So, but he's motivated. I'm motivated by it. I don't think I'm going out on a limb by saying that the Jets were staying in our hotel, as you guys are aware, in Vegas, and Chevy wasn't exactly real happy about all the noise that was going around. So I'm sure the team's happy that it's gone away at this point.
How about too? A lot of the scouts that I spoke with, Jay, were quite high in his defensive game too, right? I mean, when you see an offensive player put up close to 100 points at the Western League level, they're not always as attentive away from the puck. But sounds like this is something that Brayden has taken a lot of pride in, and just curious for your thoughts on maybe what type of players he projects, or who would be some of the similar players. I mean, for me, I haven't seen him enough live to make a good assessment, but we know in terms of stature and some of the skill sets, maybe a Brayden Point, but obviously not necessarily the finished product of Brayden Point, but at their kind of 19-year-old level, their numbers were pretty similar when it comes to their Western Hockey League showings.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I mean, obviously, it's hard when we're sitting here today to say that the kid's going to – I don't want to put that type of pressure on him that he's got to be a Brayden Point, right? But if he could be Brayden Point light, it's still a huge win for the Winnipeg Jets. So the one thing that you're gonna notice right away out of the box is that he skates much better than Rutger does. So his point A to point B game is much quicker. It's much more fluid than what Rutger's is. Rutger McGroarty, I believe, is a winger at the NHL level. I believe that his hash marks down game and his interior game between the dots in the offensive zone, net front, kind of using some leverage, boxing out opponents. I think that those types of things are going to really be his A game, if you will, where Yager is going to be able to track better. So he's going to be a guy that I believe again, with a little bit more added strength, he's got the brain, the commitment, and the toolbox to be able to do a variety of things up and down the ice. And I think that bodes well. So if he starts as he's a top 6 guy. So I don't want to even say he's a 3. You're looking at a top 6 guy who's going to be able to land on one of your power play units. I think your top one in time. And you know what, do a lot of other things. I think that on the road, you're not going to be afraid for him to spill over the boards and take on a matchup with a top 6 forward group on the other side. I think he's got the commitment in the brain to do that. So he ran out of gas at the end of the year. I don't want everybody to think that when he gets to camp here that it's all roses. He needs strength. When I saw him at the Memorial Cup with Moose Jaw, I thought they were pretty pedestrian as a group. But then you look, you peel back the onion. This guy, look at what he did last year, like Memorial Cup. World Junior Championships. I think he was like 110 games by the end of the year. And at 5'11", $180 or whatever he is right now, logging 25 plus minutes a night, anybody's going to run out a little bit of gas. So that was a small caption at the end of the year, but you better bet your bottom dollar he's working twice as hard right now, getting ready for camp.
I want to dig a little bit deeper into that shot that we keep hearing about, because I was reading up on it and I read a couple of scouting reports where the scouts kind of marveled at his catch and release, which you had already mentioned and talked about. But, you got me thinking about this because you talked about him shooting from his strong side, but also his weak side. The report that I read talked about him. Basically, it's almost like you can't give him a bad pass because he's able to kind of take and create, some oomph on that shot from almost any position that he's in. I was wondering if you could maybe wax poetic a little bit about what you see from him, but also the idea that there's some guys that have great shots, but some guys who are able to get off great shots in a lot of different ways, and how that opens up the game for them.
Yeah, so this is, I'll give you some scout speak on it because you're onto something here, Sean. So some players can only make plays with the puck when they're extended. And what I mean by that is that if you take it on your strong side, if you imagine he's a right shot. So if you imagine your right arm and it's stiff, it's out in front of you. You know what I mean? So it's out in front of you. Now I can make plays. I can make plays laterally. I can make a play in front of me, but I have to make it from that quadrant that's way outside my body, which actually brings the puck into a check. If you can imagine it, you're extending the play into a check, right? So with this kid here, what you have is a guy that, all these guys, by the time they get to the NHL, they can take a pass. It's not perfect off their skates, whatever the case may be, but it's a real elite ability when you can start making plays close to your frame. Okay. Like the bigger bodies in the NHL who, if you're 6'2", 6'3", whatever, but you can make a play like you're 5'10", because you can make it close to your body. Yager's like that. Like he can make plays in a phone booth, if you will. If you put a semicircle, if you put a circle around him, he can make it in tight to his body. Makes him harder to check. Also makes him it makes it easier for him to entice a check and then spin off the check, because that check has got to travel just a fraction further. But as you both know, you watch the games at ice level, like like the NHL has never been faster. So any little advantage you can get like that is a big deal. The other thing that it does, though, Renny, is in stride, if he busts it up his strong side in the lane, he can shoot it in stride. Okay, so he can bring on a check on his own entry, gain the edge by a fraction, and now because he can now extend after he's attracted the check, he can rip a puck on net in stride. Those are skills that you can't teach. You're born with those. It's not everybody can be a scratch golfer like Kenny W, but I mean, we can only strive. It's a God-given ability that some athletes have.
Quick one here too. I want to get back to the timing in a second, but obviously with the Jets having Colby Barlow already in the fold, Jay. I mean, if you're Kevin Cheveldayoff and the scouting staff, could you? I mean, again, we know chemistry is kind of a bit of a mystery, but I mean, to me, those guys could be pretty dominant together, whether it's on the power play or at 5-on-5. Is that something that would be a consideration when you're looking at this kind of deal, and some of the other names are kind of bringing to the surface?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Colby Barlow, because here's something that I want, and I'm sure you guys have addressed it, but when I looked at this deal on the surface as well, like when I was looking at Rutger, McGroarty, and Colby Barlow together in the Winnipeg Jets system, I thought that we had two guys that were very similar, sort of, like stature-wise, kind of a burly, shoot-first type of mentality. Colby Barlow is an exceptional leader, like in Owen Sound, exceptional leader. Okay. What you have here is a complement for each other going forward with Yager and Barlow. I like the heavy, hard, quick release, kind of bump people up pucks in Barlow. Barlow's real smart. Like he finds quiet ice in the hard areas, and he's got a great release too. He's a Winnipeg Jet. Like these two guys are Winnipeg Jets, the way that they're programmed to be. So I see the compliments of the two players alike. Not sure where it goes from here, but I see the strategy. The one thing is, let's just let it play out. Like let's not rush into this. It's not Winnipeg's way anyways. Let's just let it play out. Let's let it simmer and take hold as it progresses. But I'm with you. Don't be surprised to see those two. They really would complement each other a great deal. And I'll tell you something else. Whoever rides the other flank with that group, with those two guys, he just has to be 50 to 60% of what they provide to continue, like to extend plays and open up more space for them to do what they want. So it's going to be interesting to see how they strategize those two athletes.
So to the point that you're making about, the Jets letting this percolate and developing the player in the right way, I go back to the conversation or you were having earlier on where you talked about him being a shoot first guy to start, but over the last couple of years, he's developing a little bit more passing in his game. So one of the knocks that I kept hearing about him was that he was a shoot first guy. And as a centerman, it made me question, well, if you can't have a playmaking centerman, how does that affect the people around you? But what I started to realize is that was almost like an antiquated notion or outdated scouting reports that people were still leaning on, and that he is getting to be a player that isn't just a shoot first guy, is able to move the puck, is able to make plays. What does that, because every time you're talking about a prospect, you're talking about them being here, and in order for them to get to that spot, they got to get better, and they got to get better, and they got to get better. So what does him going from being that shoot first guy to adding that playmaking ability that you're talking about, what does that say about the trajectory he's on, and what does it mean for his ceiling?
Okay, so when we're scouting players, Renny, you're going to hear me through the course of the year say things like spatial awareness and hockey sense, right? You know, you look at a player and you hope that his hockey IQ will allow him to play in a variety of roles, kill penalties, match up, whatever the case may be. But spatial awareness is something that I've noticed has grown exponentially with Yager. So going back to the shoot first, that was the most comfortable skill attribute that he had when he entered the WHL. What do I do really well? Where am I going to have my most success early on? I rip pucks. That's what I do the best. I catch it, I shoot it. You know, maybe some other guys do some heavy lifting. As I become more of a veteran player and our team gets better and better, I need to be more of a play driver. And he's identified that and he's evolved that way. And maybe it was a little bit more confidence knowing that he could do it. You know, like it's anything else. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get doing it. And you're like, wow, I can do more of that in addition to, you know, just shooting the puck. So it speaks to his hockey IQ. It speaks to his commitment. It speaks to his confidence. But it's called spatial awareness in my book. And that's what centermen need to be able to do. I'll bring it back to this draft. Like I was perplexed. Katie Lindstrom goes fourth, right? You know, to CBJ. I love Lindstrom as a player. He's a big, strong guy. I'm worried that he's only a shoot first guy. I'm still worried about that as we sit here today. You know, 28 goals, 15 assists or something like that in a small sample size. But in the middle of the ice, you better be able to see the flanks and share the biscuit, because if you're just a drive guy, shoot guy, you're easier to defend against, if that makes sense. You have to be able to use everybody around you.
Jay, all three of us were in Vegas. We heard the chatter. We heard the buzz. We know there were a couple of close calls in terms of a potential Rutger deal kind of maybe falling through at the last second. We know Kevin Cheveldayoff was quite candid in saying, you know, he would wait as long as it would take and never even really weighed in on why it was taking as long as it was. What's the benefit for the Jets taking care of this now and having a player like Yager in training camp versus, you know, the uncertainty of not knowing and, you know, what kind of year Rutger was going to have at Michigan? What would it do for his trade value leading up to the deadline, and sort of some of those question marks that were sort of falling over the situation as it moved along?
The first one is noise. Anything that you can eliminate around one of your top prospects, you know, because nobody wanted to answer the question anymore. I'm sure Chevy didn't want to talk about it at training camp, even if Rutger was going back to Michigan. The three of us know Rutger didn't want to go back to Michigan to start this year. We all knew that. It was just going to be a matter of, you know, where things kind of fell into place. The other thing is motivation. I keep coming back to the fact that you're getting a guy in return who's familiar with what it means to play hockey in Western Canada. That means a great deal to me. Like, I think that the culture of the Winnipeg Jets organization and what it means to be a Winnipeg Jet, it has to matter to the people in the room. Like, people have to buy into that, and they have to buy into it more than some other organizations. They have to buy into it every organization in the league. But I find like there's some spots where, you know, guys kind of fake it. They bring their best version of themselves maybe to the rink, but they don't love the community. In Winnipeg, you better be all in. You got to be part of everything that we do, you know. And then the third one was, you know, you touched on Rutger. We're going back to Michigan and you know, whatever was going to happen there. I just don't want to waste any more development dollars on Rutger McGroarty. I can't say it any more than that. Like, I've gone through this personally with Zach Hyman. Okay, we drafted Zach Hyman in the 6th round when I was with the Florida Panthers. And he was drafted before I got there. I was in Nashville, but when I arrived, he was our asset. And Zach went to his senior year at Michigan. I'm going to sign, until he wasn't. Well, this was different. We knew Rutger wasn't going to sign, but it's just like your development team's going there. You're trying to instill a culture with your prospect group. It's just a distraction that we don't need to have. And let's really prop up the opportunity for a kid who really wants to be a Winnipeg Jet. So, you know, all that's encompassing for me, and it's part of the culture. It's a requirement.
Just simple question from a scout's perspective: which of these two players ends up being the better player at the NHL level?
Yager is a more complete player, but McGroarty will have impact. I think McGroarty will have more impact earlier than Yager. Yager will be a long-term better pro, better point producing, more flexible player, if you will. I think Rutger's built early to be okay, better, but he's not going to be the same as what Yager will be in 3 years.
Interesting.
Just quickly, I mean, it's sort of on the similar vein, Jay, but, you know, and we know these things with RFAs who don't have ARB rights can take time. Would there be any concern that has taken this long with Perfetti? And would you even be, if you're Kevin Cheveldayoff, would you be concerned about a deal being done in training camp? And the reason I reference that is that, even other players who wanted to be in Winnipeg long term, like Patrick Laine, like Kyle Connor, even Josh Morrissey missed a day or two of camp as a first round pick, and before he could get his bridge deal done. I mean, just overall thoughts on where things stand with Perfetti, and do you think it's bridge, or would there be some benefit on both sides to going longer term based on what we've seen in some of the other markets and some of his peer group this year?
Great question. I feel like Perfetti has been, I don't think he's an anomaly per se, but I feel like he's been a little bit of a nomad in the last couple of years. Like, I'm not, is he or isn't he? You know what I mean? Like, there was I think he's a top 6 player. If you peel back the onion on his year last year, you look at his defensive metrics, even like this kid, he's doing he's carrying his weight. For me, he's carried his weight. Okay. But for some reason, it's been stop and go a little bit for him at times in Winnipeg so far. I think the trajectory is positive, but that brings me pause that maybe his side of the ledger wants to do a bridge deal, which might mean that maybe Winnipeg's side is looking at something a little bit more cost certain long term. I think it's going to be a bridge, Ken. That's my gut. The timing of it, it's not. I don't like it when it goes into training camp. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. It's happened before. There's been a lot of other things that Winnipeg's had to take care of this offseason. Coach, this Rutger McGroarty thing, going through free agency and just different things. So I'm okay. I think it's going to resolve itself.
Jay, before we let you go, I can't remember if I asked you this, which probably is an indication of how many of those glasses are red that I was having that night we were together.
Well, to be fair, you stayed for 2 weeks. So, I mean,
Bill Zito said one of the most fascinating things I've ever heard when I interviewed him after the Cup was won. And I asked him about putting together, and being the guy who has to look after the chemistry of a team and make sure everything fits. And he said something I've never heard anyone say about a player before. He said about his captain, Sasha Barkov, whom you helped bring into the organization. You scouted him. You had the book on him coming in. I wanted your take on this, but he said about Sasha Barkov, he is such a good leader that as a GM, he does not have to worry about chemistry. He simply goes out and we need a guy who can score a certain amount of goals. You go get him. You need a winger, left winger, you grab him and you put him in there because Sasha Barkov was such a good leader that it did not matter who you were bringing into the dressing room. He would make him part of that team and it would work. Have you ever heard anyone talk about a player like that before? And what can you tell us about what you saw in Alexander Barkov that may have shown you that he was going to be that kind of force?
I think that generational talents garner that reputation when they start winning Stanley Cups, like the Sidney Crosbys and even Wayne Gretzky. If you guys really want to think about it, back in the dynasty years, that was almost by committee, wasn't it? A bunch of guys that they had there. The thing I'm going to say about Barkey is this, and I did another hit with somebody else earlier in the day today, and they were reminiscing about the New Jersey draft and how we took Barkov 2, and it was supposed to be Jones or Drouin after McKinnon, and the thing about it is, guys, that 3 staples. First of all, just give me 30 seconds to get this off my chest, Renny, if you don't mind. Like, to be an NHL player, you got to be able to skate at NHL pace, think at NHL pace because it's fast. You have to be a relentless competitor. As soon as you have those 3 things in place, your skill attributes will flourish, right? But if you don't have those first 3 things in place, the underbelly either is going to take a long time to come to the surface or you're never going to get there. So when we drafted Barkey, he had all those in spades, and then the skill and the brain to kill penalties at the elite league level already, all these things. But then what it did, when he arrived, it took another 4 or 5 years for the room to understand the personality of your leader. Okay. He's a cerebral guy. You guys have interviewed him. He's a cerebral guy. He's almost like he doesn't have a pulse, right? Mm-hmm. He's like, he never gets flustered, never too high, never too low. He's all about process. So when you go into a dressing room and your leader on the hardest days, I'm not talking about the easy ones. We all have those fluff days where the game comes easy and you pound a team by a touchdown. Those happen in the NHL. I'm talking about high leverage, hard days. When you look across the room and you see your leader and he never changes his approach, he's the same every day. Boy, that's got to bring pause to you and say, listen, we got this, and we're just going to toe the rope in that guy's direction. He doesn't have to even say a word. We're just going to follow that. And that's a real nice compliment by Bill Zito. He's done a hell of a job in Florida. I'm happy for the franchise. Obviously, I'm a little, I got mixed emotions because they traded out, all of our assets basically that we brought. We brought in we had a whole whack of assets. I could sit here and talk to you for 10 minutes. He didn't necessarily see those assets for him. The league did everywhere else. And he traded out all of our high-end guys to bring in a different type of player. But I'm proud that our staff left them the assets, left them a full cupboard of draft picks to do it a different way. And kudos to him. But Barkov and Ekblad, the guys that were our staples, they're still kind of steering the boat there.
And just one quick one here. Just speaking of the Finns, and just because I was there in Finland for the Global Series, it's such an interesting dynamic with him and Patrik Laine. Even though Barkov is the older person, to me, watching those two interact, Laine is like the older brother, even though he's younger in age, just in terms of the gregarious, outgoing personality versus Sasha's kind of calm, steady presence. But I love the way those two interacted throughout that whole trip. Jay, what were your thoughts on Patrik going to Montreal, where we know he'll have a player's coach who probably will give him every opportunity to flourish? What do you think of the fit there?
I think it's actually got, I think it's a risk reward. I think all of us would agree with that. It's a risk reward. But listen, guys, when I've been hard on Patrik Laine, until I had to I don't want to create bias on everybody. It's so easy in pro sports to just stare at something, create a bias, get your ass in a knot, and, pick on somebody. That's not fair. So I went back, in his first 45 games in CBJ, 21 points, minus 29. In his last 129 games before he went into the program, with the PA, 129 games, 117 points, and minus 29 still, but they were a tire fire. I think we would all agree with that, right? This guy's still a hell of a player. If they can get the best version of him and he's motivated, and I think they have a real good culture growing there in Montreal, I think you're going to see him do very well.
I'm glad you're giving us the perfect launch point, because we're going to dive into Laine to Montreal right after this. But as usual, Jay, hey, there's no summer rust going on here. You absolutely hit your spot once again. I know Kenny and I are spinning the wheels trying to get going here. Boy, you're like that boat that I was water skiing behind here this summer. Absolutely leading us flying down the way here. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for letting us surf in your wake, Mr. Bukala. Enjoy the rest of your summer.
Amazing, guys. I look forward to seeing you guys in a couple weeks in the fall. Have a great training camp.
Talk to you later.
You too, Jay. Thanks, my man. Thank you.
Excellent. Nails it. Always nails it.
Tremendous.
So good. I wanted to say a couple things quickly, because he's a good launch to Laine. But before we do that, when the Edmonton Oilers were coming back and taking that series from 3-0 to 3-3, one thing always stood out to me, and it's that Barkov came out after every single loss, and he very calmly talked about how good the Edmonton Oilers were. And I found it so odd that he was just so willing to be like, man, those guys are good. Like, did you see them out there? Did you see Connor in that game? And he would just kind of go on and on and on. And yet there was something about it. He would deliver this, what we were all seeing. That series, the Edmonton Oilers took over games 4, 5, and 6 in a dominant fashion, one of the most dominant 3-game stretches in Stanley Cup final history. And throughout that, despite the fact that because there's a lot of players out there who need to lie to themselves, right, Ken? Oh, they're not good. Yeah. It's not what they did. We just weren't doing this and whatever. He was like, make no mistake, guys, you are watching greatness out there on the other side of the ice. And we've got things that we need to do and that we can get to, and we're going to go get to work on that as soon as you shut the cameras off and we get in the back room. And at the time, I thought we were watching maybe a young guy who didn't have the fire to get his team up and get them to where they were going. And instead, what we saw was a steady hand at the wheel as the road was falling away in front of them, and the wind was blowing, and the heavens opened up and were storming down on them. And they come out and have that performance in Game 7 to end up winning the Stanley Cup. Right. He just really highlighted and opened up what really made Barkov special. And I think a huge reason that the Florida Panthers ended up winning the Stanley Cup at the end of the year there. Launching into Laine. What's that?
Let's squeeze in our other sponsors before we go
Okay,
there.
well, let's throw a couple things in there. You want to give a shout out to Sweet Lou?
You bet. For folks who have realty needs they'd like to have met, you can contact our main man, Lou Furlan, at Royal LePage Dynamic Realty, 204-791-9971, or at the office, 204-989-5000. His email is lou@loufurlan.ca. That's LOU@LOUFURLAN.ca. Lou Furlan, excellent realtor, excellent human being, and excellent supporter of the community, including this podcast.
Shout out to the Johnston group, the Kenny and Renny OGs, who, of course, they're here in the summer because they have been behind us since day one. That's why they are the Kenny and Renny OGs. They've had us covered, whether it's fall time, winter time, springtime, or even summertime like this. Great to have them on board and getting back into the We Got You Covered plays of the game. Hopefully, Kenny and Renny got you covered a little bit late after the trade, but hopefully we got you covered. I can tell you this, bringing Jay Bukala into the conversation sure brings a lot of value to everybody out there, no doubt about it. I saw someone say earlier the keg save of the game. It was apt. I like that. Keg save of the game was apparently, according to that person, Kevin Cheveldayoff, saving the Rutger McGroarty situation by getting Brayden Yager. Ken, here in 3 years from now, the expectation from Jay Bukala that Yager will be the better player, like this could really, you could go back. I hope everyone remembers the circumstances that surround this, because a lot of times it ends up just being this player got traded for this player, and you don't remember the pressures that made the trade happen or all those kind of things. You just remember that this player was traded for this player. If we look down the road from here 3 or 4 years from now and see that Brayden Yager is the superior player and that there's not a lot of people in the league who would revisit a trade and be like, I'm not trading Yager for McGroarty. Boy, oh boy, remember what Kevin Cheveldayoff was up against in this situation. That's a tough one, and a reason why that I think is a very good call for the keg save, not of the game, of the off season here, if we can stretch it to that. And of course, I've been asked over and over and over again about when the next event is at TCB. Well, we're going to have to go figure that out, but geez, we got to get down there at some point. Missed the place, haven't been there for a little bit, wanted to get down there only because I've been out of town. I've gone in, I've stopped in, got myself some blueberries because you can't get through the summer without those bad boys. But hey, we'll be back to handing out lamp lighters. I would fully expect that's going to be fun to do because that's always a fun part of the show. Nectar of the Gods. Love gifting the Nectar of the Gods to the folks. And in the meantime, if you can't wait for the season to start and us to start handing those out, go on down to their tap room at 11290 Kenniston. Join them. TCB, just a great, great partnership that we have and are carrying into the next year. It's going to be great. Laine, get into it.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have both discussed this matter quite often, dating back to, I mean, the buzz we had been hearing around Vegas was that the Jets were potentially interested in a renewal of vows, if you will. And
I didn't hear that.
You didn't hear that?
No, hear that. I wherever I checked, I personally don't believe that was ever true.
That neither side had interest?
That there was like, oh, sorry. I don't think it was ever going to be true that it was a possibility. I never truly believed it was a possibility.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think it would have made sense on some levels, but it was just too complicated. As I mentioned in our monthly mailbag over a month ago, there was a slim chance just because of the money and because we know that Columbus wanted to get out of it without retaining. And that's what they did with the deal with Montreal. And yeah, I mean, you did mention it that it made sense as a fit, partly because of Marty St. Louis, and also because we've talked about this a lot. I mean, Montreal hasn't had a dynamic goal scorer of the likes of Patrik Laine for some time. So he's the kind of guy who can electrify a crowd if he's on his game, and we know he's some people saying that he's not playing the way that he did when he was in Winnipeg. Well, no, he's not producing to that level, but I mean, there were years where he was close to a point a game player. So. I know you also thought previously maybe Matt Barzal would be a perfect fit for him, but I see Nick Suzuki and Patrik Laine having the potential to do some great things together. Is he going to get back to being a 44-goal guy? I'm not sure, but I won't be surprised if Patrik Laine is. I will be surprised if he doesn't eclipse 30+ next year, and I won't be surprised if he sniffs around 40 and then sees what happens. But most important thing for Patrik is that he's doing better. He's out of the program, and he and his partner are doing a great thing in terms of trying to promote mental health and well-being. So, we're obviously people who have known Patrik since he was 18 years old, and he was nothing but respectful and candid and engaging with us. And, I'm wishing him all the best in his next chapter here.
So Jay nailed people. I know when Laine first went to Columbus, it looked ugly, just like it looked ugly when Pierre-Luc Dubois came to Winnipeg at the beginning. Both failed to launch at the beginning. The one thing I always looked at, and this is, while he's losing his dad and having injury problems and all these things, exactly what Jay pointed out: 126 games, 117 points. Yes, minus 25, but like he said, everyone on that team was going to be struggling to stay. And that's not, hey, if you are a goal scorer like Patrick Laine is, and that's your job, and we all know, but we don't look at Patrick Laine to be, the best defensive forward in the NHL. No one's expecting that. So a player like Patrick Laine on a team that's struggling to defend, those numbers are going to look like that. But I don't think, if you take a look at Patrick Laine, if you take out that first part when he got there, and then in spite of all the injuries, of the mental health issues that he's going through, losing his dad, all the different kind of things that happened there, he's near a point per game guy on a team that struggled, a guy who's supposed to be purely a shooter without having a true setup man. He was still almost a point per game player. That's ridiculous. People are sleeping on Patrick Laine in my mind, and I can understand why. And I can understand even, in the circles of the Finnish media, I think they've really questioned his compete and his willingness to play hockey. I loved what he said when he came out. I love how he's looking forward to playing hockey. I love how he's got that swagger back, it seems to me, where he's saying, listen, it's not a fluke that I scored 40 plus goals and I expect to do it again. I love that idea. It's a young roster. There's a lot of different options. Nick Suzuki, like you had said, is a guy who really does a good job drawing guys in, could set him up. There's Slavkovsky is a big guy up there who's starting to be up and coming. Kirby Dack, we haven't seen that team with him. There's a lot of young, good players and a lot of different options. In Winnipeg, it felt like they were refused to look at the idea of putting him on a line with the likes of Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler. So he was on a line with Brian Little. As good a player as Brian Little was, it did not work between those two players. I remember that one year, Ken, he was Patrick Laine's primary centerman the year he scored 44 goals. And I think that Brian Little, his centerman, assisted on 6 of those goals. Okay. That, yes, he gets a lot of his goals on the power play, but that says something that a shooter like that was not able to click more with his centerman. I think there's a lot of options there, but you talked about it. I've been talking about it for a long time. Marty St. Louis is the superstar whisperer. He knows the mindset. He knows what each of those players need. He's a caring guy, and I'm nothing against Pascal Vincent, but it was clear Patrick Laine had some issues with the team, with his surroundings here in Winnipeg. For a guy who ended up having mental health issues, I think the way that he wanted out of Winnipeg, you could suggest that may have started in Winnipeg if he's trying to force his way out of a town that he never wanted to leave. That continued in a situation here. If you can get Patrick Laine's mind settled, get him comfortable, get him back focused on hockey, a player that despite all that chaos had out of 126 games, 117 points, and rediscover what was clearly and undeniably one of the best shots the game, not just in the game, but the game has ever seen. There's potential here for this not to be a grand slam for the Montreal Canadiens. This is a walk-off championship grand slam potential for this deal. I think we talk about risk and reward. There's risk and reward, but the reward for this, for the Montreal Canadiens, with what they have in place and how I think that they can set up Patrick Laine and guide Patrick Laine, I think could be absolutely outlandishly huge.
Yeah, and I mean, if he gets it going, great for him. So, I mean, again, was a great quote here. He was a great player for a long time, and it's too bad how things ended up. And he's got a fresh start now, and it's odd that, both Laine and Dubois are now on their, second team since the original trade, that it was a blockbuster at the time. A couple more quickies before we roll at getting close to the top of the hour.
Yeah.
Quickly, Elliot Friedman in his 32 thoughts mentioned the Jets were one of the teams that were serious about Marty Necas.
Yeah.
Curious for what you thought about that, and then we'll go into the offer sheet activity after that.
We knew from a long time ago the Winnipeg Jets, and the one thing we know about the Winnipeg Jets is when they're interested in a player, they stay interested in them, right? Brendan Dillon was a guy they tried to get a couple of years before they eventually ended up getting him. When they identify a guy that they think is a fit in Winnipeg, it's not one of these things where they lose interest, right? It's like they carry a flame over those guys for a while. The Winnipeg Jets have liked and been carrying a flame over Marty Necas for a long time. I think, Ken, from what I've heard, is that in the past they've tried to get him, and that this wouldn't have been the first time there was talk of a deal that would have involved Marty Necas and Nikolai Ehlers, not just this year, but years ago. So
the Vancouver draft, I think, right? That was when they were talking about Brett Pesce and Necas, I think.
It makes sense to me. The Winnipeg Jets love the player. They want him. I understand why they love the player. Marty Necas is a guy that I think in a different, as good as that team is and as good as he plays there, he's a guy that I think that there's maybe some unfound potential that if you got him in the right circumstances could really sprout elsewhere. So I think Marty Necas made tons of sense for the Winnipeg Jets. Doesn't surprise me for a second that they were hot in pursuit of the player.
Yeah, me neither. And I mean, again, it's still, he's a guy who can play center. I think he's had most of his success on the wing, and he hasn't been a stylistic fit, even though he gets along just fine with Rod Brind'Amour. But I mean, it's a two-way street. Brind'Amour is asking for more of him in the terms of his two-way game in order to reward him with more ice time. And I mean, last year we know that there were times when Necas was on the third or the fourth line, but he was on the top power play. So I was curious to see, I'd be curious to see what the actual offer was and how close it maybe was to getting done. But yeah, I mean, we would still stash that away for safekeeping, right? I mean, I think he signed a 2-year deal that I think walks him right to UFA status. So I'm not sure that it would be the last time that we see those two sides linked together. And then lastly, we've talked a lot privately about the offer sheets and the successful offer sheets that the St. Louis Blues signed with Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway.
God, yeah.
Let's dig in on that quickly before we roll out.
You want me to go first? I'll go first. Brilliant move by the St. Louis Blues. And I know a lot of people are talking about overpay and all this kind of stuff. And are they paying those players more than they've earned at this point in their NHL careers? No doubt. To me, this is just a cost of acquisition thing. How often, I mean, the Montreal Canadiens go out and they basically trade a second rounder for Jordan Harris, and then they take on Laine's contract. They're buying a player. They went out and bought a player that another team doesn't want. This happens all the time in the NHL. I'm going to tell you from covering the Edmonton Oilers in those last 2 rounds, what I saw from Phil Broberg was a guy who got called up, and there was a question of whether or not he was going to be able to handle it in the playoffs. I saw a guy that I don't know if I saw him make a single mistake from the point that he checked in a high tempo, high pressure series against the Dallas Stars, and he just got better and better and better and never showed any flaws in my mind right through to the Stanley Cup final, where he almost helped the team win it all. Now, doing it 82 games and then the playoffs, I'm not saying because he did it in the playoffs this year, that's it, he's arrived. But boy, oh boy, that's a good test to have out of the way. I think he's a huge pickup. And then if you're talking about Dylan Holloway, had 2 or 3 key goals, assists throughout that playoff run, showed up at the right time. I thought he got better and better as well. I thought he also showed that he could be used on lines that were a little less impactful, and yet at the same time go up and play with a guy like Leon Draisaitl. All kinds of potential for that player. I like both those players a lot. I had thought the Edmonton Oilers were in such a good spot with those guys stepping up in their roles. Brilliance on the part of the Blues, knowing A, that they probably wouldn't be able to play those players, but B, that the Oilers are a team that need to keep as much money open as they can to make sure they get Leon Draisaitl re-signed going into next season, as it's the last year of his deal. This is the smartest usage I have ever seen of an offer sheet, and count me as someone who has no issue at all for a team like the Blues that want to be more competitive than they are. The game is all about finding assets. You can find it at unrestricted free agency. You can make trades, which usually means you're moving an asset for an asset. So it's often as you're trying to be the guy who starts trading a paperclip and ends up with a house at the end of the whole thing. It's not that easy to do that. Usually that's a zero-sum game, or you draft, and drafting takes time. They went out and bought 2 first-round picks who showed amazing potential in the most pressure-packed time of the year with the Edmonton Oilers this year. They brought them in. This is brilliant GM movement by the St. Louis Blues, and it is the best use of an offer sheet that I've ever seen in the NHL. Unbelievable move by the St. Louis Blues.
Yeah, and I mean, part of the reason we're talking about it is that it's going to, could change the complexion in the Central Division. I mean, most of us thought that the Blues were, again, going to be a non-playoff team this year and would be looking at maybe selling off assets. Instead, they've extended Pavel Buchnevich, and they brought in a guy who, I mean, again, Sean, you were in the building, I was watching at home, but Philip Broberg is a guy who, needed to marinate at the American Hockey League level. But when the Oilers needed him to play top 4 minutes in the playoffs, he was able to provide that because he is a, big bodied but mobile and smart puck mover. I mean, would it be optimal if he played a little bit more physically? Sure, but he could grow into that 6'4", 212-pound frame and eventually do that. Or, maybe he'll just check the way that Jay Bouwmeester checked when the St. Louis Blues won the Stanley Cup, with his stick and with his feet and with his brain. So I love that move for the Blues. I mean, is it a slight overpay now, $4 million when he was being offered 1 point whatever? Sure, but I'll be surprised if he's not making north of 4 on the next deal. This isn't a Jesperi Kotkaniemi type of deal where, you're overpaying initially and then you're extending him on a way lower number. I mean, Broberg is a guy who, and the Blues are able to probably put Torrey Krug on LTIR. Who knows if he'll play again, but you're replacing Torrey Krug with the 23-year-old player who is going to, at this stage of his career, probably be a better player. So I love that move. I know Dylan Holloway will bring speed to the Blues, and that's an area where the Blues, since 2019, I don't know that they have been the fastest team. I mean, they've got some really high-end, skilled players like Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou, but I think adding the speed of Holloway will help them. I mean, there have been some, the scouting report on Holloway sometimes, revolves around hockey sense and, his hockey mind being able to keep up with his feet, because that's more a matter of his feet being so fast. So he's a guy that I think the Blues will come to like. Maybe he's not, I wouldn't say he's a physical player, but he's definitely fast. He'll bring speed. He'll bring, Sean, as you said, kind of middle 6-ish ability. Who knows where he fits in best, but certainly the St. Louis Blues got better in a quick hurry, and it didn't cost them a lot to do so. And I've said this with Hustler. I mean, I love Doug Armstrong. He's always been a big and bold general manager, but I can't help but wonder if Alex Steen had some impact here, and not just because Broberg is a Swedish guy that he would know. I think that this is Alex Steen, the future GM of the Blues, coming in and saying, let's lean on the CBA. I mean, why are teams tiptoeing around these sorts of situations? They saw a team that was vulnerable and they attacked that team and their vulnerability. And at the same time, I think Stan Bowman did a nice job of, I think Podkolzin, who will be a guy who, no offense to Holloway, I think Podkolzin kind of brings a little bit more, edge and sandpaper and maybe a little bit higher ceiling in terms of his ability to score with some of those skilled players. But again, those teams are both trying to do different things. The Oilers were 1 win away from winning the Cup. So they were in a spot where they probably couldn't match. And even when they cleared the money out in order to be able to match 1 or 2, if they chose, they've chosen to go the other route. And time will tell if that works out for the Oilers or not. But this to me was more about the longer term. And I wrote about this in the Free Press, Sean. This wasn't just about finding the money now. It's the fact that Leon's salary is, I don't know that it'll double, but it's definitely going to 12 or 13 or probably 13 and a half mil.
North.
It's got to be at least
of
13 and a half, right?
So I think he'll be the highest paid player in the game when it's done. So
until Connor gets his next deal,
exactly.
Right after that. So anyways, I think it's fascinating. I think the West is pretty wide open. Well, I would say it's still pretty wide open, even though the Oilers will go in as the Western Conference champions. And they had a great offseason. And even losing those two players, they still had an above average offseason. But the Oilers defense core is very thin right now in terms, especially on the right-hand side. So I think that Stan Bowman's job is just beginning, I guess, if you will. But that's part of the fun. What you look like on paper doesn't always translate to what you look like in the game. No one would have predicted that Jay Woodcroft would be fired and the Oilers would be tied for last place with the Sharks, whatever it was, 20 plus games into the season. But they made all the way to the Stanley Cup final and just about won the cup. So, I mean, I think that's part of the fun, and that's why we'll be super eager when we come back in, September here. After I get back from Italy, we'll have some kind of training camp preview or, update from how things are going, and that's part of what the joy level will be high, definitely, when hockey is back. We're almost back, so that's
just good. a couple points I want to make here. Troy Stevens says Montreal is risky for Laine. If he struggles, he'll get booed. Could go sideways if he's not careful. Agree with this. Montreal can be a pressure-packed market, but the one thing everyone keeps using that as like a tick in the con category for this deal. I think that you have to give a tick in the con side of things, but you also have to give a tick in the pro side, because the one thing about Montreal is they fan really, really well. And when things are going good, they love it. They enjoy it. And it could be an amazingly fun atmosphere for a guy who, when things were going his way, seemed to have almost more fun than anyone else in the game playing it. Think of the idea that if Patrick Laine gets rolling, what that fan base could mean to him. So I think there's risk here in that, just that it's a risk and reward deal. There's risk that the fans could turn on the guy, although I don't know that they know what's going on here. They're trying something, right? It's not a guy who's walking in and demanding a certain amount of money. They're buying something and they're giving it a try. I think people are sleeping on the idea that if he gets going and those fans get behind him, you could get a surfer riding the wave here in that situation. Also, just wanted to bring it up and say it, Ken. I think Elliot talked about it in his 32 thoughts as well. Color me like extremely surprised about the Boston Bruins and the potential for an not an offer sheet, but inviting Blake Wheeler to camp to see if he could maybe stick there. I keep hearing that. That's the place where it started for Blake Wheeler. He would start and end his career there potentially, but he was kind of pushed out of that room as that team was trying to get everything right for their run. And I know people always talk about what a terrible trade it was, essentially Rich Peverley going one way for Stewart and Wheeler. And if you look at it in retrospect, it looks terrible, but Peverley actually was really good for the Bruins, helped them put a banner up. You can never question a banner once it's up. It's the right move, whatever you did. But, you hear people talking about that deal, correcting the room, and Blake Wheeler's place in it, I have heard in the past was part of that deal. So for him to be going back there, that seems a little bit strange, but I get it.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, and I would say too. I mean, Blake's in a different scenario now too, in a different situation, different point in his career, and I mean, one thing from talking to him, I mean, missing out on that Stanley Cup championship is something that is painful for Blake. I mean, he doesn't like to talk about it, but I remember a time early in his Jets career where he shared some of those thoughts, and if he's able. He did a great job in getting back for that one playoff game with the Rangers after a horrific injury, and for him to go to a place like Boston, to me, makes some sense. I think he could succeed under Jim Montgomery, whether that's in a third or fourth line role that would remain to be seen. But I mean, Danton Heinen went to the Bruins on a PTO last year, made the team, and ended up being an impact, a guy who had impact on their checking lines. So wouldn't surprise me, but I'm going to be the same, Sean. I mean, when I listened to Blake Wheeler speak at the end of the season in New York at their garbage bag day exit interviews, to me, he sounded like a guy who was done. But, sometimes you go back home and you start training and you think, you know what, I still want to get my name on that trophy. So if he's going to extend his career, I mean, all the best to him in that next chapter.
Well, he's earned opportunities with 2 teams that were legit cup potential teams, if that's the case. So good on him for that. Before we do go here, Ken, I just wanted to go on a little bit of a rant here. Going to try and hold this together. We lost our family dog, Bowie. I had to put him down. He had bone cancer and lasted about 6 months after the diagnosis, pulled it together. Bowie was this big, giant, 130-pound black lab that people would mistake for a Great Dane. He was so big, and he had this big club tail that he was always happy, and he would be swinging that thing around. He'd knock stuff off the table, and if he hit you in the side of the knee, it would really hurt. And in the morning, you'd get up, because labs just love food the way they do. You'd get up out of bed, and he'd be waiting at the hallway, and that tail would go thunk, 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 thunk against the wall. And that wall was our youngest's bedroom, and it was so loud, and you're trying not to wake everyone up in the house, and you'd run out, you'd like say, Bowie, stop, be quiet. And you didn't want him to wake up my daughter, and you'd grab his tail to try and keep it from shaking and from wagging, and you'd lead him outside, and then you'd feed him, and he'd come in. Bowie just had this habit of always being, it was, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but like, he was always almost in the wrong place at the wrong time. When you were trying to close the dishwasher, he was in there licking the plates. When we were trying to wash the dishes, he was lying right there. And I always remember my wife being like, Bowie, come on. And you'd try and move your chair at the dinner table, and he'd be right there. You'd sit in the recliner, and you couldn't pull the recliner down because he'd lie under the footstool of the recliner. So you had to climb out all weird. You'd be in the bathroom trying to go to the bathroom, and he'd nose the door open. He'd lie right in front of you. You'd go in the shower, and you couldn't get out of the shower because he'd be lying on the other side of the door. You've seen him on this podcast here, folks, where he noses his way in here and has come in. You've seen him, the big black dog. I think personally, he had a sixth sense where he could tell when Renny was really about to drop a really, really bad take, and he'd be coming in trying to shut it down, you know. But Bowie, all those years, we thought that he was in the way. Now that he's not here, there's no freedom. There's just a big hole. Sorry, folks, I'll get through this. So for 8 years, I'd get up in the morning, and I would try and silence that tail. I would try and mute it. I would try and stop that thunk, thunk, thunk. And now I'll just spend the rest of my life wanting to hear that again.
Well said, buddy. Well said. Thanks to everybody for joining us to a special pop-up edition of the Kenny and Renny Show. And we'll be back with you in about a month. And as Sean likes to say, we'd like to thank the good folks who have been supporting this show throughout the course of the season and the summer and the off season. That's Lou Ferlin, the Johnston Group, Vittorio Rossi, the Keg, TransCanada Brewing Company, Pristine Roofing, and the good folks at Cambrian Credit Union. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Talk to you next month. R.I.P. Bowie.
Love your animals, people. Love each other. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us.